The chair was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not overturned, not dragged to the center of the room, not placed against a wall it had never touched. Just wrong by 6 inches, maybe 8. Pulled slightly away from the kitchen table at an angle that she would never have left it at, because she always pushed chairs in. Always. Her mother had made a point of it when she was young, had come behind her in every kitchen of her childhood and pressed the chairs back flush against the table edge, had said we don't leave things halfway, and the habit had installed itself so completely that doing it was no longer a decision. It was the last thing she did before leaving a room. She pushed the chair in. The chair was not pushed in. Sara stood in the doorway of her kitchen at 7:15 in the morning, coat half on, travel mug in one hand, and looked at the chair. She looked at it for a long time. She thought about the night before, whether she'd sat in it, whether she'd gotten up quickly, whether something had distracted her. She thought about the chair in the way you think about something ordinary that has briefly stopped being ordinary, turning it over, looking for the explanation that will restore it to its category. She pushed the chair in. She went to work. She did not think about it again for 3 days, which is how long it took for the next thing to happen. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Fenwick Street that had been converted from something industrial in the 90s and still carried the evidence of that conversion in its high ceilings and its wide windows and its occasional smell of something metallic that the landlord had explained twice and that Sara had stopped asking about. It was a good apartment. It was her first apartment alone. Before it, she'd had roommates, a series of them, women she'd found through the University Housing Board, and then through apps, women who were fine, and then less fine, and then gone. The usual sequence of shared living. When the last one left, Sara had decided to try alone. She was 26. She had a job she liked and a salary that covered the rent with a small margin of comfort, and she had, she felt, earned the privacy. The apartment had 2 windows in the bedroom, both facing the alley behind the building. One opened easily, the other had been painted shut at some point, and Sara had never bothered with it. The bathroom had a small frosted window above the shower. The kitchen had 1 large window facing the street. The living room had 2, also facing the street, with a good view of the intersection and the pharmacy on the corner, and, in autumn, a single large tree that turned a color she had no name for. Something between red and orange, something specific to that tree and that season. She lived here for 3 years. In the first 3 months, she noticed the chair twice more. Both times the same chair, the one at the head of the table. Both times slightly displaced, as though someone had sat in it and pushed back and then thought better of leaving it that way and pushed it in part way, almost all the way, but not quite. Almost. She mentioned it to her friend Nadia, who was a practical person. "Are you sleepwalking?" Nadia asked. Sara said she didn't think so. She said she'd never sleepwalked in her life. "How would you know?" Nadia said. "You're asleep." Sara thought about this. It was a reasonable point. She decided that she was probably sleepwalking. She decided it was probably anxiety. She'd started a new position at work that autumn, a step up, and the pressure of it was constant and low-grade and everywhere. Anxiety made sense. Anxiety was an explanation she could install and live inside. She installed it. She went on. In November, the window in the bedroom that opened easily. Sara's habit was to leave it open a crack during autumn, for the air, which was cold but clean in a way the apartment's interior air was not. She'd open it an inch before bed and close it in the morning. She was consistent about this because the radiator in the bedroom ran warm and the cold air was the counterbalance she needed to sleep. An inch. She knew the distance. She'd done it enough times that an inch was a specific thing she could identify without measuring. She woke one morning and the window was open 6 inches. She stood at the window and looked at it, and then looked at the alley below. The alley was empty. The fire escape outside the window was wet with morning rain. She looked at the window track, the old painted wood of the frame, and she could see that it had been opened and closed many times, that the paint was worn where hands would be, in the places where you'd grip. She closed the window to an inch. She told herself, the wind. The window was not the kind that the wind could open. It was not a loose-framed window. She knew this. She chose not to know it for the purposes of the morning. She made her tea, and she went to work, and she thought, on the train, about anxiety, and about sleepwalking, and about the chair, and she filed the window in the same category she'd built for the chair. The category whose label said incidental and explicable, even though she had not yet provided the explanation. The feeling came in December. It was not a new feeling. She'd had versions of it before. That mid-room awareness of being observed. The animal reflex that evolution had installed in mammals as a survival mechanism, and that modern life had converted from survival mechanism to anxiety symptom. She'd felt it in parking garages. She'd felt it late at night in the office when she was the last one there. She understood that the feeling was her nervous system running an old subroutine and finding no evidence to confirm or deny, and that in the absence of evidence, the sensible thing was to complete the procedure and file the result as inconclusive. She understood all of that. But the feeling in December was different in quality from the parking garage feeling and the late office feeling. Those were situational. They arose from environments that were objectively outside the norms of her habitual experience, places that her nervous system had filed under unusual context, increased alertness. This feeling arose in her bedroom, in her bathroom, in the ordinary moments of her ordinary life in her apartment, standing in the kitchen making dinner, standing at the bathroom mirror, lying in bed before sleep, the feeling of being watched. She was not, she told herself, being watched. She was anxious. The job was stressful. She had been alone in the apartment for 6 months, and aloneness had its own pressures, its own habits of mind, and one of those habits was this: the monitoring of space, the heightened sensitivity to the immediate environment that comes from having only yourself to rely on. She was, essentially, being too good at being alone, too vigilant. Her nervous system was calibrating to a threat level appropriate to isolation and finding nothing to apply it to and redirecting it inward, and the feeling was the result. This explanation was good. She used it for 2 years. The second year, nothing dramatic. This is important to say. There was no escalation that would have been unmistakable. No clear evidence that she could have pointed to and said, this is the thing. There was only the accumulation, quiet and slow, of small wrongnesses that she filed away one at a time and never laid beside each other to see what shape they made together. The chair, intermittently. Not every week, sometimes a month would pass with nothing. And then it would be wrong again, by the familiar amount, at the familiar angle. The window, not always open by the same amount. Sometimes barely a centimeter more than she'd left it. Once, in March of the second year, she woke to find it fully open, and the cold of the room had woken her at 3 in the morning, and she'd crossed to the window and closed it, and stood for a moment looking out at the empty fire escape and the alley below, at the orange streetlight pooling on the wet asphalt. And she'd felt the feeling very strongly, and she'd stood still with it for a moment. Stood still and let herself feel it without immediately filing it. And then she'd gone back to bed. She told Nadia about the window. Nadia said she should get the window frame looked at by the building super. The building super came and looked at the window and said it was fine. He opened and closed it 3 times and said the mechanism was sound and that he didn't see a problem. The super left. The window went on opening. Small things. Here is a list of the small things I am choosing to include, because the list matters, because the list is the shape of what was happening even when she couldn't see the shape. The faint impression on the armchair in the living room that she did not own any furniture covers for, where the cushion was occasionally compressed in a way that she had not compressed it, in a position that was not her position for sitting. She was small and sat with her legs folded. The impression was longer, wider, the impression of someone sitting upright with their feet on the floor. The smell. Occasional, brief, in the bedroom specifically. Something like soap and something beneath the soap, something human. She attributed it to the building's ventilation, which was old and shared the building's air between apartments in ways that were obscure and unpredictable. 3 times in the second year, she found her bedroom door open in the morning when she was certain she had closed it. Not the front door, never the front door, which was double locked, which she checked every night. The bedroom door. She slept with it closed. She woke with it open. She attributed this to sleepwalking. She bought a sleep tracking app. The app recorded movement during sleep. On the 3 mornings after the door was open, the app showed no movement. She thought the app was faulty. She stopped using it. In the 3rd year, she started the journal. Not because of any of it, because her therapist suggested it. She'd started seeing a therapist in the 2nd year, a mild and careful woman named Dr. Osei, who practiced a variety of CBT and who had identified Sara's primary mode as thought suppression, which is the technical term for the thing Sara had been doing. Filing everything away before it could be examined, installing explanations before questions had been fully asked. Dr. Osei said, "Write things down. All of it. The anxious thoughts, the feelings, the things that bother you. Write them down and then look at them. A thought examined is a thought you have some power over." Sara bought a journal. She was 30 at this point. The journal was dark blue, a good size, the kind of journal that people buy when they mean to use them. She wrote in it regularly, at night, at the kitchen table with the window dark and the lamp on and the apartment quiet around her. She dated each entry. She wrote about work. She wrote about Nadia and her other friends. She wrote about the anxiety, the feeling of being watched, the things she'd noticed. She wrote about them all here, together, for the first time in the same place. And in the act of writing, she saw for the first time how many there were, how they clustered, how the chair and the window and the door and the smell and the cushion impression and the feeling all occupied the same space, her apartment, her rooms. And she sat with this for a moment one October night in the 3rd year and felt something she had been not feeling for a long time. She felt afraid. And then she thought, anxiety. She thought, Dr. Osei. She thought about the way that anxiety builds narratives, the way that a mind under sustained stress will assemble unrelated data points into a pattern that confirms its fears, will confabulate connection where there is only coincidence, will see the shape of the thing it's afraid of even in random noise. She wrote in the journal, "I think I've been making connections that aren't there. I think the apartment is fine. I think I'm fine." She closed the journal. She pushed in the kitchen chair. She went to bed. She did not know that someone read what she had written. She did not know that someone read what she had written that same night. What she knew about the building. The building had 12 units. She knew her immediate neighbors, the couple in 4B, who were quiet and kept a doormat with a sun on it, and the older man in 4A, who she passed occasionally in the hallway and who nodded but did not speak. She knew the building super by name, Paul. She knew the landlord by phone and email only, a management company, the kind of company that responds to maintenance requests in a range of 1 to 3 weeks, depending on the season. The building had a basement she had never been to. There was a door in the lobby, past the mailboxes, that was always locked. Paul's domain, she'd assumed, maintenance, boiler, the ordinary underground infrastructure of a building. She had never asked about the basement. She had no reason to. The power went out on a Thursday in February, the 3rd year. She came home from work at 6:30 to a dark building. The common areas were on emergency lighting only, the pale green of the exit signs making the hallway look underwater. Her apartment was completely dark. She navigated by the flashlight on her phone, found the candles she kept in the kitchen drawer, lit 3 of them, arranged them in the living room. She ate a cold dinner. She read for a while by candlelight, which is a pleasant thing to do when it is a choice and is a different thing when it is not. At 9, she decided to sleep. She took a candle to the bedroom and set it on the nightstand. She changed into pajamas by the candle's light. She got into bed and lay there listening to the building's particular silence. Power outage silence, which is different from normal silence because it removes the white noise of appliances and the hum of the building's electrical system, all the sounds that you don't hear until they're gone. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, the street had a different quality too. Some streetlights out, she thought, or all of them, hard to tell from bed. She looked at the ceiling. The candle threw shadows. She was not, she realized, comfortable, not afraid. She named it to herself carefully and settled on not comfortable, which was honest. The dark and the quiet had weight. She lay with it. She told herself she would sleep and that in the morning the power would be restored and everything would be ordinary again, and this was probably true. She was looking at the ceiling, making this case to herself, when she became aware of something in the left corner of the room. The corner to the left of the door, where the wall met the wall and neither window reached, where the candle's light was weakest, where the shadow was deepest. That corner. She became aware of it the way you become aware of things in peripheral vision. Not through looking, but through a shift in the quality of attention, the eyes adjusting to something the brain had already noticed. She lay still. She didn't move her head. She moved only her eyes. The corner of the room. Something different about the corner of the room. She lay completely still, and she looked at the corner of the room with her eyes moved as far left as they could go, and the candle moved in some current of air, and the shadows shifted, and she saw. For a moment she didn't understand what she was looking at. For a moment it was simply a shape, a variation in the darkness, a darker column against the dark of the corner. Her mind ran through the objects in her apartment, running inventory, trying to match the shape to something that belonged there. Nothing matched. The shape was wrong for the bookshelf, wrong for the door, wrong for the chair she kept in the corner with clothes on it. The shape was narrow and tall, and it had a particular quality of shadow that was not the quality of an inanimate object's shadow. It was upright. The shape was upright the way a person is upright. Sara did not scream. She would think about this later, about the absence of the scream, and she would understand it as the body's response to extremity. The body choosing stillness over noise, choosing not to announce itself, following the same old instruction that had put her in this position in the first place. Don't move. Don't be seen. Wait. She lay completely still, and she looked at the shape in the corner of her room, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once, assembled from 3 years of small things that she had filed away and never examined together. Assembled from the chair and the window and the door and the cushion and the smell and the feeling and all of it, assembled in 1 second from the accumulated data that she had refused to let add up. She understood that the shape was a man, that the man was standing in the corner of her bedroom, that the man was very still, that the man was watching her. She did not know how long she lay there. She would try to reconstruct it later and would not be able to. Time under that level of fear does not behave normally. It pulls and stretches and skips. It becomes untrustworthy. It gives you long empty moments that feel suspended and then sudden movements that you didn't perceive happening. She lay still, and the man stood still, and the candle burned on the nightstand, and the power stayed out, and the apartment was quiet with its power outage silence, which she would never again experience as a neutral thing. At some point, she moved. She did not plan it. She did not decide. Her body made the decision, and her body was right, because there was no version of stay still that ended well. And her body knew this even when her mind was still running the inventory of the corner, still trying to find the explanation, still reaching for the filing cabinet. She rolled off the far side of the bed, away from the corner, and hit the floor and was moving before she'd fully landed, was through the bedroom door and into the hallway and through the apartment to the front door. The double locks, both of them, her hands not shaking because adrenaline is not always shaking. Sometimes adrenaline is a terrible clarity that makes your hands very steady and very sure, and she was through the door and in the hallway of the building and down the stairs and in the lobby and through the front door and on the street. She ran to the corner. She stopped. She looked up at her building. Her apartment windows were dark. She called Nadia. Nadia came. The police. She told them what she had seen. She told them calmly and clearly, the way Dr. Osi had taught her to tell things. Without suppression, without premature filing, just the data in the order it occurred. She told them the shape in the corner. She told them the 3 years of small things. And she watched their faces as she described the 3 years, and she saw what moved across their faces, and she understood what was moving there. They were kind. They were professional. They went through the apartment and found nothing. No man, no sign of forced entry, no evidence of occupation. They checked the windows. The front door showed no damage. They checked the bedroom corner and found the chair with clothes on it, exactly where it always was. One of them gently asked about her mental health. She said she was in therapy. He nodded. She understood what the nod meant. She also understood that the man had had 3 years of practice at leaving no evidence. 3 years of knowing the apartment, knowing her schedule, knowing her rhythms. 3 years of entering and departing without leaving traces that she recognized as traces. He would not have left through the front door. He would not have been there when they checked. He was practiced. She told the officer this. The officer wrote something down. She stayed at Nadia's that night and the next night and the next. On the 4th day, she went back. She went in the daytime with Nadia, and she went through every room and she opened every closet and she opened the panel under the kitchen sink and she pulled the furniture away from the walls and she looked at the bedroom floor and she opened the window and she looked at the fire escape. She found nothing. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. And then she thought about the journal. The journal was on the table, where she always left it, in its place at the table's edge. She picked it up. She thought about what she had written in it. The past year, the entries, the things she'd described. She thought about Dr. Osi's advice. Write it all down and look at it. She'd been looking at it alone, all this time. She opened the journal. She read the most recent entry, the one from the night before the power outage. Her handwriting, her words, the things she'd written about work and the feeling and the decision to believe she was making connections that weren't there. She read it, and it was hers. She turned the page. She looked at the next entry. Her handwriting. The next entry was in her handwriting. She had not written the next entry. Here is what the entry said. The date was 4 days before the power outage. A Wednesday. She had been at Nadia's for dinner on that Wednesday. She remembered it specifically because they'd argued mildly about something and then resolved it over wine. And she'd come home late, close to midnight, and she'd been tired and had gone directly to bed. She had not written in the journal that night. The entry that she had not written in her handwriting, dated that Wednesday, said, she came home at 11:47. She smelled like wine, and she had her coat on longer than usual before she put it away, just standing in the entryway with it on like she forgot she was wearing it. She does this sometimes. I don't think she knows she does it. She went to bed without washing her face, which is unusual. She was asleep by 12:15. She breathes differently when she's tired, shallower, faster. She had the window open a crack and I closed it a little because the room was getting cold and I didn't want her to be cold. Sara read this. She read it again. She sat at the kitchen table in the daylight with Nadia across from her, and she read the entry again, a third time. And then she set the journal flat on the table, and she put her hands in her lap, and she breathed. I need you to look at this, she said to Nadia. Nadia looked. Nadia's face changed. There were 47 additional entries. Not all nights, not every night, not with any regularity she could immediately identify, but distributed across the 3 years, 47 entries that she had not written. She found them by reading every page. Some were adjacent to her own entries, written in the same pen, in the same handwriting, and she sat with the technical fact of this. The fact that he had matched not just her handwriting, but her pen, or had some other pen that produced indistinguishable marks. And felt the thing that this meant, the care it implied, the attention, the study. He had studied her handwriting. He had practiced it or had some ability she couldn't account for, and the result was 47 entries that were hers in every visual characteristic and were not hers. Nadia called the police. The police came back. This time they looked at the journal. This time their faces were different. The entries. She read all of them. She did this alone. The night after the police came the second time, at Nadia's kitchen table while Nadia slept. She read them beginning to end, and she will not describe all of them, and I will not describe all of them, because some things that are true are also private, are also a violation that does not bear repeating in detail, that the person to whom they happened owns completely and does not owe to anyone. But I will describe what they contained, because the shape of what they contained matters. They contained observations, the kind of observations that require presence. What she wore, how she moved, What she said in her sleep, which she apparently did sometimes, single words and once a full sentence that he had written down. They contained opinions, brief and careful, about things she did, small approvals, small notes of concern. When she was ill in the second winter, 3 entries in a row described her sleeping, her breathing, her color, and one of them said she should eat more. She didn't eat today. They contained records of things he had done. The chair. He wrote about the chair. Not all 47 times, but several. Explained it as having sat at the table when she was asleep, at a distance from the bedroom door where he could hear her breathing. He wrote that he had tried to be careful about pushing it back. He wrote once that he'd made a mistake, pushed it back wrong, and then written, "I don't think she noticed." The window. He adjusted the window when the room was too cold. He was specific about the temperature, about the balance between fresh air and warmth, about what he judged to be her comfort level. He wrote about this with the attention of someone performing a service. The door. Twice he'd accidentally left the bedroom door open when he left. Both times he'd written about it as a failure of discipline. Both times he'd written, "I'll be more careful." The impression in the armchair. He sat in the armchair sometimes, in the living room, when she was asleep. He wrote that he liked the armchair. He wrote that it was a comfortable apartment and that she kept it well. He had been inside the apartment 212 nights across 3 years. She counted. She went back and she counted all the implied nights, the entries he'd written, the incidents she'd documented and he'd referenced, the nights she could reconstruct, and she arrived at 212. She was not certain this was accurate. She thought it was probably low. He had watched her sleep 212 nights, and she had not known. How he entered. The police found this eventually, with a more thorough search than either visit had provided. In the basement she had never been to, Paul the Super's domain, there was a door she hadn't known existed. Buildings built for industrial use sometimes have connective passages, utility corridors, maintenance access points that predate the conversion and are no longer documented in current plans. This building had one. It ran from the basement level to a service corridor that the conversion had sealed at every apartment level, except it turned out the 4th floor, where the drywall that should have closed it was installed slightly short, leaving a gap behind the built-in closet in Sarah's bedroom. Not the main closet, the narrow secondary one that she used for extra linens and that she opened perhaps twice a month. Behind the built-in shelving of that closet, a gap. Narrow. Enough. The police found in the basement corridor evidence of occupation. Not elaborate, not a bed or a camp, not a domestic arrangement. A folded blanket, a small lamp, a bag, some personal items. Evidence of someone who passed through rather than lived there, who used the space as a threshold, a staging point, a place to wait. They found his fingerprints on the built-in shelving. They found his fingerprints on the inside of the bedroom window frame. They found on a small shelf above the folded blanket an ink pen. The ink matched the journal. He was found 4 months later. I will not describe the finding, not because it is unimportant, but because it is Sara's and because her name is not Sara. I have called her Sara, and the name is protective, and everything I know about her, I know from a document she released through a lawyer 2 years after this ended, a controlled account, her account. And if she chose not to include the finding of him, then I will honor that choice. What she included was this. She included the journal. Not all of it. Excerpts, enough to establish the shape of what it contained. She included the timeline of 3 years, the small things laid out in order, which she described as the education I couldn't accept giving myself. She included the police's findings. She included the corridor and the gap in the drywall and the pen. And she included one entry from the journal that she said she found the most difficult to read. Not because it was the most intimate, not because it was the most detailed, but because of what it described. The entry was from the 1st month, October, the 1st year, before the window had happened, before the door, before most of the small things. An early entry, one of the earliest. It described watching her read. She had been reading in bed, she said in her account. She remembered that night, a novel she'd liked, a night she'd felt calm, a night she'd gone to bed early and spent an hour reading and then slept well. She remembered it as a good night. One of the good ordinary nights that you don't retain in detail because there's no reason to retain them, because they are the texture of a life rather than its events. The entry described her reading, the angle of the light, the way she held the book, when she turned out the light and lay down, the length of time before her breathing changed. And then, at the end of the entry, one sentence that she reproduced in her account exactly. She looked like she felt safe. Sara lives somewhere else now. This is what her account says at the end. She says this without further detail, and without the name of the place, and without a description of the apartment, because she will not describe any apartment she lives in to any audience. Because she understands now, she writes, that an apartment is not a private thing in the way she believed it was. That the walls of any space you occupy are not a guarantee. That the feeling of being alone is a perception and not a fact, and that she had trusted the perception for 3 years and the fact had been otherwise. She writes that she still writes in a journal. She writes that this is an act of refusal, of insisting on the thing that was used against her as still being hers. She writes that Dr. Osi suggested she stop and that she disagreed, and that Dr. Osi supported the disagreement, and that she writes in the journal and she trusts it. She writes that she checked the new apartment, the walls, the closets, the built-ins, the basement access, the supers arrangements, the corridor plans, which she obtained from the city planning office. She writes that she checks these things periodically and that she does not call this paranoia. She calls it knowing the difference between the feeling of safety and the fact of it. She writes that the hardest thing was not the man. The hardest thing, she writes, was the chair. That first morning, the chair pulled out at the wrong angle, and the explanation she'd reached for. I must have left it like that. I must have been distracted. I don't always pay attention. She could have chosen differently. She knows this. She was not stupid. She was not oblivious. She was someone who had been taught, by a lifetime of the noise of her own anxiety, to distrust her own perceptions, to file before examining, to reach for the explanation that cost least. And she had the data. She had the chair. She had it from the very beginning. She writes, I knew the chair. I always pushed the chair in. I knew it was wrong. She writes, I wish someone had told me that the feeling of being watched is a sense, that we have it for a reason, that it was shaped by a very long time of being something that other things hunted, and that its job is to know before the rest of you knows, and that when it speaks, you are allowed to listen. She writes, I thought I was anxious. I was right. The journal, the 47 entries, the handwriting that was hers and was not hers. She described them in her account, and I have described them here, and there is something in this that I've been sitting with, that I will end with, that I cannot find a frame for that satisfies me. She wrote in the journal, I think I've been making connections that aren't there. He read what she wrote. He wrote the next entry. She found both entries on the same page. Her handwriting, his handwriting. Looking, according to Nadia, who was the only other person who saw the journal directly, looking exactly the same. The entry he wrote, the night after she wrote that she was probably fine. The night after she wrote that it was all anxiety and imagined connections. It was brief. She reproduces it in full. She's starting to trust herself. I need to be more careful. There are things about enclosed spaces that I believe now that I didn't believe before. I believe that the silence of a room is not always the silence of emptiness. I believe that a feeling is data, even when it is not proof. I believe that the difference between intuition and anxiety is sometimes only this, whether someone was there. Sara pushed the chair in every night for 3 years. She knew the chair. She was right. She was right from the very beginning, and the beginning was the chair. And the chair is still the thing I think about. The ordinary morning, the coat half on, the travel mug, the chair pulled out at the wrong angle in a kitchen that someone else had been in. The chair that she pushed back in, and went to work, and did not think about, for 3 days.